Story 1. In a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio stood a house that had been rented out many times over the years. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary. 2 stories, pale siding, a narrow driveway, and a small patch of lawn in the front. But neighbors often whispered about strange things that seemed to happen there. Lights turning on in the middle of the night when no one lived inside, shapes moving behind the curtains. Most people in the neighborhood had simply learned to ignore it. Eventually, a new family moved in, completely unaware of the rumors. The Thompsons, Mark, his wife Laura, and their 10-year-old son Evan had just relocated for Mark's job. To them, the house seemed perfect. It was quiet, affordable, and close to Evan's new school. The first couple of days went by normally. They unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, and slowly turned the empty house into something that felt like home. But the third night was when things started to change. Around 2 in the morning, Laura suddenly woke up. At first, she didn't know why. The room was dark and silent, except for the steady breathing of Mark beside her. Then she heard it again, slow footsteps coming from downstairs. They weren't loud, but they were clear enough to make her sit up in bed. The sound moved across the kitchen floor like someone walking carefully through the house. Laura assumed Mark must have gotten up for something, maybe water or a late snack, but when she turned toward him, he was still asleep. The footsteps stopped abruptly. The rest of the night passed in silence. In the morning, she mentioned it, but Mark shrugged it off. "Old houses creak all the time," he said. "Pipes expand, wood shifts, and it can sound like footsteps if you're half asleep." Laura tried to believe him. The next night, their son woke them up. Evan quietly stepped into their bedroom, his face pale in the dim hallway light. He whispered so softly they could barely hear him, "Mom, there's someone outside." Mark immediately sat up. "What do you mean?" Evan looked nervous as he pointed toward the window at the end of the hallway. "There was a man standing in the yard. He was looking at my window." Mark grabbed a flashlight and walked downstairs. He checked the front yard, the driveway, even the backyard. There was no one there. The grass was undisturbed and the street was completely empty. When he came back upstairs, he told Evan it was probably just his imagination, but the boy shook his head slowly. "He was there," Evan insisted, "and he was smiling." For the next few days, things seemed normal again, but Laura couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in the house. Then the sounds started happening every night. Sometimes it sounded like someone slowly walking down the hallway downstairs. Other times it was faint knocking, like someone tapping lightly on the kitchen wall. Mark checked the doors and windows repeatedly, but everything was always locked. One night, Laura woke up again around the same time. The house was completely silent. Then she noticed something strange. A faint glow was coming from the kitchen downstairs. She nudged Mark awake and whispered that the light was on. They both clearly remembered turning everything off before bed. Mark slowly got out of bed and walked down the stairs. The kitchen light was on, exactly like Laura said, but when he reached the bottom step, it suddenly flicked off. He stood there for a moment, confused, before switching it back on himself. Nothing was out of place. No broken locks, no open doors, just an empty kitchen. When he returned upstairs, Laura asked what happened. "Probably a faulty switch," he said, though his voice sounded less confident now. A few nights later, something even stranger happened. Evan woke up screaming. Mark and Laura rushed into his room and found him sitting upright in bed, shaking. He pointed toward the corner of the room. "He was standing right there," Evan said through tears. "The man from outside." Mark turned on the light and searched the room. The closet was empty. The window was closed, but Evan kept staring at the same corner like he still saw something there. "What did he look like?" Laura asked gently. Evan hesitated before answering. "He looked wet." Neither parent understood what he meant. The next morning, Mark decided to ask one of the neighbors if anything strange had ever happened in the house. The older woman next door went quiet when he mentioned the address. After a moment, she finally said something that made Mark's stomach drop. Years earlier, a man had lived there alone. One winter night, his body was found in the backyard. No one ever explained why he was there in the freezing rain, standing in the dark behind the house. According to the police report, he had been dead for hours before anyone found him. Mark didn't tell Laura or Evan what the neighbors said. He didn't want to scare them. But that night, something happened that none of them could explain. Around 2 in the morning, Laura woke up again. This time, she heard footsteps right outside their bedroom door. Slow, careful, like someone pacing in the hallway. She gently woke Mark and they both listened. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the door. Then came 3 quiet knocks. Mark stood up and slowly opened it. The hallway was empty, but at the far end, near Evan's room, the floorboards were wet, as if someone had been standing there dripping water, and the wet footprints led directly to Evan's bedroom door. Story 2. Several years ago, a group of storage garages on the edge of a small Arizona town became the center of a disturbing mystery that few people who worked there ever forgot. The facility was a long row of metal storage units surrounded by a tall fence and a single security gate. During the day, it was usually quiet, with people coming and going to store furniture, tools, or old belongings they didn't have space for at home. At night, the place was almost completely empty. The only person on site after midnight was the overnight security guard. One of those guards was a college student named Daniel. It was an easy job, mostly sitting in a small office watching security cameras and occasionally walking the property to make sure everything was locked. For the first few weeks, nothing unusual happened. The rows of garages sat silent under dim yellow lights. Wind sometimes rattled the metal doors, but otherwise the place felt deserted. One night, around 1:30 a.m., Daniel noticed something strange on one of the cameras. A storage unit near the back row appeared slightly open. At first, he assumed someone must have forgotten to lock it earlier in the day. He grabbed a flashlight and walked out to check. The wind was blowing lightly as he moved between the rows of garages. When he reached the unit from the camera feed, the metal door really was lifted a few inches. Daniel crouched down and shined his flashlight inside. All he could see were cardboard boxes stacked against the walls. Nothing seemed unusual. He pulled the door down completely and locked it, then returned to the office. About 20 minutes later, he checked the cameras again. The same unit was open again. This time, the door was lifted almost halfway. Daniel felt a chill run through him. There was no way someone could have opened it without him hearing the gate alarm. Still, he assumed there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe the lock hadn't fully caught. He walked back out, slightly more nervous now. When he reached the unit, the door slowly creaked upward another inch as if something inside had pushed it. Daniel froze. The wind had completely stopped. The row of garages was silent. He lifted the door the rest of the way and shined his flashlight into the unit. The boxes were still there, but something else caught his attention. A narrow space between 2 stacks of boxes looked darker than the rest of the room. As his light moved across the space, something shifted. Daniel immediately stepped backward. For a split second, he thought he saw a person crouching behind the boxes. "Hello?" he called out. No answer. His heart started racing. He slowly stepped forward again and pushed the boxes aside. The space behind them was empty. Confused and unsettled, he closed the unit again and locked it more securely. When he got back to the office, he rewound the security footage. What he saw made him stop breathing. The camera pointed directly at that storage unit. On the recording, the door slowly opened by itself, exactly like he had seen. But a few seconds later, something appeared in the frame. A thin figure stepped out from the darkness inside the unit. It didn't move like a normal person. Its posture was wrong, hunched and jerky. The figure stood completely still for several seconds, staring directly toward the camera. Then it slowly stepped back inside, and the door lifted again, as if something had pulled it open from the inside. Daniel immediately called his supervisor. The police arrived within 15 minutes and searched the entire property. Every unit was opened and checked. They found nothing, no one hiding, no signs of forced entry. But the officers did notice something unusual inside that specific storage unit. The concrete floor was damp, as if water had been dripping from something for a long time. The unit's owner was contacted the next morning. According to the records, the man hadn't visited the facility in almost a year. When police finally reached him, he sounded confused. He explained that the unit was supposed to be completely empty. He had cleared it out months ago and canceled the rental agreement. When employees checked the paperwork, they realized something disturbing. The system still showed the unit as active, but no payments had been made for nearly a year. That meant the unit had technically been abandoned. But the strangest detail came from Daniel himself. When he reviewed the footage one last time, he noticed something he had missed earlier. The figure that stepped out of the storage unit had no visible face, just a dark outline where its head should have been. Story 3. Late one autumn night, a rideshare driver named Kevin accepted a trip request that would later become the most disturbing experience of his life. Kevin had been driving for extra money after his regular job, mostly picking up passengers around the outskirts of a quiet Pennsylvania town. Most of the time, the rides were simple, people heading home from work, bars, or the train station. But one night around 2:15 a.m., a request came from an address far outside the main part of town. The pickup location was a narrow road surrounded by woods. Kevin hesitated for a moment before accepting it, but the ride fare was unusually high. When he arrived, he noticed something strange immediately. The road was completely dark. No street lights, no nearby houses except one old property sitting far back from the road. The request showed the passenger waiting near the driveway. Kevin slowly pulled the car to the side and looked around. After a few seconds, a man stepped out of the darkness near the trees. He walked toward the car slowly, keeping his head slightly lowered. When he opened the back door, Kevin caught a quick glimpse of him in the rearview mirror. The man looked extremely pale, almost sickly. His clothes were damp, like he had been standing outside in mist or rain. "Thanks for coming," the passenger said quietly as he sat down. Kevin asked where he was headed. The man gave an address about 20 minutes away in another town. The drive started normally, but after a few minutes, Kevin noticed something unsettling. The passenger hadn't moved at all. Most riders check their phones or look out the window, but this man sat perfectly still in the back seat. Occasionally, Kevin glanced at the mirror. Every time he did, the passenger seemed to already be staring directly at him. About halfway through the ride, Kevin finally tried to make conversation. "Late night out?" he asked casually. There was a pause before the man responded. "Something like that." His voice sounded distant, almost tired. The rest of the drive passed in silence. As they approached the destination, Kevin noticed something odd about the address. The location led to an empty parking lot behind an abandoned building. When the car stopped, the man slowly opened the door. Before getting out, he leaned slightly toward the front seat. "Thank you for the ride," he said. Then he stepped out and walked into the darkness behind the building. Kevin watched in the mirror as the man disappeared around the corner. Something about the whole interaction felt wrong. After a moment, Kevin checked the ride details again. That's when he noticed the passenger name had disappeared from the app. Instead of a name, The screen just showed "trip completed." The payment still went through, but the account information was gone. The next morning, Kevin mentioned the strange ride to another driver while they were waiting near a gas station. When he described the pickup location, the other driver looked uneasy. He told Kevin that the house on that road had been abandoned for years. A man who once lived there had reportedly died under mysterious circumstances. According to local rumors, he had been found wandering the woods late at night before collapsing near the road. Kevin laughed it off at first, assuming it was just small-town gossip, but later that afternoon, he checked his dash camera footage out of curiosity. The recording clearly showed the entire ride from the front seat perspective. Kevin watched as the passenger entered the car and sat down behind him, but something about the footage made his stomach drop. Throughout the entire 20-minute drive, the man in the back seat never blinked once. And in the reflection of the window beside him, there was no reflection of his face at all. If you liked these stories, subscribe to the channel and write a comment about your scary story.